Hey everyone, it's definitely been a while since I've done one of these versus style videos, about 6 months to be exact. So I'm here with Anne Boonchuy from Amphibia versus Luz Noceda from the Owl House. Although this is a battle that wasn't necessarily requested super often in my comments from what I can recall, I feel like it's one a decent chunk of people have at least thought about due to these two shows kind of being sister shows with female protagonists that eventually gain access to some pretty ridiculous powers. I think part of the reason I didn't go do one of these sooner was because I didn't think laying everything out would be all that interesting, but I was definitely smoking some penis because their matchups are pretty cool to lay out when going over all their main power levels throughout their respective series. So the plan here is to lay out how strong the two of these girls were in each respective season of the show, which works out perfectly since both these shows went up to 3 seasons. So both of these characters start off pretty green, just typical teenage girls with no crazy fighting skills or anything like that, so it's kind of impossible to know who'd win for sure right off the bat. But after a bit of time passes, I'd probably have to give Luz the advantage here. The amount of things Luz was able to accomplish once she got access to glyphs was pretty insane, because prior to season 2, she wasn't really combining glyphs like that from what I recall. It was mainly just fire, ice, and plant magic, but it was able to do quite a lot, holding her own relatively well against Emperor Bellos and catching him off guard at one point and dealing damage to his mask. Granted, there's no way she would have won that fight, because even at the end of season 2, with all the extra experience she'd gotten, she still got bodied pretty hard, but getting in some kind of damage was solid. Anne, on the other hand, was still a very strong fighter in her own right. All the experiences she had with the monsters of Amphibia allowed her to become a stronger fighter than most of the entire country's residents by the end of season 1. Maybe that's giving her too much credit, but this is the same Anne that was able to hold her own fairly well against 3 of Toad Tower's elite guards and beat Sasha Waybright in a 1v1 with zero interference from either the frogs or the toads. Sasha at this point in the series was able to take down a giant heron almost entirely by herself. A Grime was helping, yeah, but there were also 2 herons, so I'd give her the win here if it was just her against one single heron. And the problem is, Anne still wasn't really tapping into her calamity powers at this point in time yet, mainly because she didn't really know how, but that doesn't change the fact that her true power hadn't been realized. The closest she got was holding back that giant praying mantis in episode 1, and her powers were not properly used again until the beginning of season 2. Hence why I think I'm gonna give the end of their season 1 power levels to Luz. The amount of destructive power and range just the 3 main glyphs give her, I believe, outweighs Anne's solid fighting skills. I just can't see how Anne can even get anywhere near Luz in her non-calamity form. Dealing with the plant glyphs probably wouldn't be too tough because she typically uses a sword in combat, so Anne could just chop the vines down maybe, but the fire and ice ones, I feel like she wouldn't be able to do much against a Luz that had even a decent amount of glyphs on deck. Now, these show's second seasons are where things change a lot, especially for Anne. Her calamity powers became a lot more useful now, despite only activating twice this season. The amount of extra strength that she was able to tap into during these fights was a lot more noticeable. Her agility and general movement during combat felt like it improved the most here. Like when she was able to easily take down that giant vegetable monster that destroyed the planner's home with ease, which is a feat that I think further solidified her being around small, maybe regular building level at this point in the series. But this is the only time we see her vaguely tap into her powers at this specific level and engage in direct combat with someone else. And she was in base when she beat Sasha, we gotta remember that. Obviously, power scaling stuff like this is almost entirely hypothetical, but we're going into some next level hypotheticals here when it comes to only Blue Eyes and versus standard glyphs Luz. It just comes down to if you want to believe if Anne is fast and agile enough to just avoid Luz's long-range glyph attacks so she can actually get close enough to land a blow. So I'll just give them a draw in this instance. But when Luz starts to develop more glyph combinations, I almost want to give Luz the advantage here again, specifically against Anne when only her eyes were able to glow blue and nothing else. Because even before the end of season 2, Luz had a lot of glyph combinations she was capable of doing now. And mainly the invisibility glyph, the safety hover glyph, and teleportation. Invincibility is probably the most useful in a fight in my opinion, with the other 2 being better for utility purposes. The teleportation one in particular takes quite a bit of prep time too because of how much the user needs to draw out. Call me crazy, but I don't think Luz is gonna have time to draw out more than 10 symbols in a specific way while Anne is hauling ass towards her. Invincibility, on the other hand, can be incredibly good for landing various sneak attacks to negate Anne's increased speed. Luz could even take some extra high ground to do some aerial attacks with her glyphs and use the safety hover after the fact to land totally fine. So once again, I think I need to give Luz the edge here when it comes to the majority of their respective season 2 screen time. However, endgame of the second seasons are a completely different story, because when Anne's able to channel her near perfect calamity form, I don't think Luz stands a chance. It's barely even close. Anne's physical strength and speed increase tenfold on top of being able to control forms of blue energy at will. Energy energy powerful enough to knock large groups of people on their asses just by stomping on the ground in the group's general direction. There seems to be a very low likelihood that any of Luce's glyph magic can match Anne's destructive power here. Anne is now at a point where she can match the range Luce gets from her plant and ice glyphs, plus she naturally outspeeds and overpowers her in close combat. That's Luce's biggest overall issue at this point in time, is the vast majority of her combat potential comes from glyphs and needing to draw out glyphs. Her physical capabilities are nothing too special. She's definitely gotten stronger in that regard since the start of the show. She overcame her weak nerd noodle arm disease, but let's be real with ourselves here, she's not going to be able to defend herself from a Calamity Anne attack. Anne's Calamity form being temporary during this time in Amphibia is kind of irrelevant in my opinion, because she more than likely will be able to deal with Luce before her body gives out, requiring a full reset. Like, I don't really think she needs that much time. One of the better instances I can think of where Luce's glyphs had solid, I guess, durability is when she was using a bunch of different plant glyphs to hold together the Titan's head chamber when the Collector was breaking everything apart. I still don't think those vines take a full power punch from Anne in this form though. I just don't see it happening. These show's third seasons are a weird one due to the Owl House not getting a full proper season, so there's just less to cover on Luce's end. Like, the entire first episode of the specials didn't really have Luce partaking in any combat like that due to her not being able to use glyphs in the human realm. Hey, it's me from the future. Forgot to mention Luce did technically use glyphs at the very end of Thanks to Them because of how close she was to Titan blood, but that doesn't change the fact that she was out of magic practice for several weeks prior to this, so it was like 99% of the time she was in Connecticut, she just wasn't able to use magic. Whereas Anne just continued to get stronger and stronger throughout not only her journeys back in Los Angeles, dealing with foes like Mr. X and the Cloakbot, but when she was able to get back to Amphibia, things didn't slow down either, you know, having to prepare an entire army and set their differences aside to take down Darcy and King Andreas. It was just almost non-stop action. And with almost each passing episode, being able to gain more control over her powers to the point where she can activate and deactivate it on her own terms without needing to take a period to rest after the fact or need to be super emotional to get them to come out. The power still had a time limit though. Reason I bring that up is because Luce does end up getting a power up during season 3 before the very end, her Palisman String Bean, which was powerful enough to completely scorch a Boiling Isles forest with presumably 0 drawbacks. That's the thing about String Bean, is she doesn't really have a time limit, I don't think. So I think Luce having her does make Calamity Anne versus Luce with String Bean a bit interesting. That blast String Bean shot off could potentially do some damage to Anne, I think. Anne's got solid durability for sure, but considering the type of attack she was taking from Andreas' mecha form, I feel like String Bean's Magic Blast is arguably stronger than some of those blows Andreas was dishing out. This blast goes pretty far and, you know, covers a wide radius too. And I'm kind of just going off the assumption Luce could spam it if she wanted to, because she didn't say or imply that blast had any drawbacks to it. Granted, she did only use it a single time, so it's weird. Overall, I still think Anne takes the W here. Anne's blue Calamity Blast can more than likely still match String Bean, plus Anne's speed is just still so ridiculous that Luce being able to keep up just doesn't seem likely. It's not going to be a total blowout like their end of season 2 selves, but Anne still has the noticeable advantage here. And as for their endgame peak power potential selves, Luce is once again back to being diffed pretty hard.
Oh, come on!
Anne's full power Calamity form is just so ridiculous. Her destructive power here, probably bare minimum island level, bare minimum. The size of the monsters she was able to take out with such ease, combined with the explosions they caused, were ginormous. Plus, she, Sasha, and Marcy were able to stall the moon's progress for a period of time. Like, they didn't, like, stop it completely, but they were able to slow it down. Then, of course, there's the secret spell where she was able to use the combined forces of all 3 Calamity Stones to completely destroy the moon. It cost her her life in the process, but she was still able to destroy the freaking moon. As for Luce, her peak was obviously when she went Titan form to defeat Emperor Belos. Luce also had complete control over all kinds of glyphs without even needing to draw the symbols out on a surface. Anything she wanted was just available in thin air. There's also the Titan Whale and her glyph shield. She basically had the power of a fully realized Titan with a Palisman for extra variety. Her attacks were able to completely demolish Belos' magic, which was powerful enough to spread throughout the entire Boiling Isles mainland, Belos' magic to be clear. So the fact that she was able to completely negate that and spread it from such a long range is very impressive. But I think the glyph shield might be the most insane, because she's able to increase her defensive capability a ton and fly around inside of it too. Like, she like flew to the stratosphere with that thing. The big issue I have here is her powers were just limited to the Boiling Isles mainland. Extra places outside the Isles, like space or things of that nature, were not explored outside of the Collector's powers. Plus, there's Belos, who wasn't even defeated by Luce in a 1v1. Like, yeah, he lost, but Luce was getting help from King, Ida, and Rain, who are all pretty freaking powerful themselves. He was just that far ahead of everybody else in the series. Now, I always say how much of a pusher I am for the transitive property when it comes to power scaling stuff, so technically, you could argue Bellows was like moon or planet level because of how he was able to practically negate the Collector completely. Though I feel like this is an instance where that property can't be used because Bellows possessed the Isles itself, which are the remains of the Titan. And Titan magic completely counters Collector magic. For my One Piece fans out there, saying the Collector is overall weaker than Bellows would be like saying Jinbei is stronger than every Devil Fruit user in the entire series because he can use seawater in his attacks. It's just not a thing. Luz could definitely get some kind of damage in against Anne, probably even more than the matchup of her just having String Bean against temporary Calamity Anne, but Anne still beats her for sure. Anne likely doesn't even need to use the secret spell with all 3 stones to beat Luz. I don't think it would need to go that far, to be honest, and even if it did, Anne just still wins, so it's whatever. All in all, Luz definitely had her advantages in the early parts of the series, but when it comes to their peak powers, she can't really hold much of a candle to Anne. Anne is just that strong. And yes, neither of them can beat Goku. Let me know in the comments if you guys have any other suggestions about other Versus style battles that you'd like to see, or just your general thoughts on this video. I would love to know your thoughts. As always, a huge thanks to Janky Bones for the incredible artwork they did for this thumbnail. It never ceases to amaze me. But for now, I will see you guys next time. Peace out, take care, bye-bye.